Everyone, it's Joe from greenlightsound.com, and today we've got a look at a new compressor from Kush Audio, SILIKA, which is basically a two-section compressor. We've got our distortion saturation section on the left side, the diode distortion section, and the compressor section on the right side. And these two things in combination give you some really analog-style saturation and compression sounds. The diode section bases its distortion signature on the input and output transformers of a 1973 ADR Compex and the gain reduction circuit of a Neve 2254, both classic analog units used on countless recordings with complex distortion sounds each. For a quick overview of the controls, we're going to start on the left-hand side with the input, which can be thought of sort of as a drive knob. So you turn it clockwise for more saturation and compression. The output knob, of course, so you can balance the signal leaving the plug-in. The diode type switches between two different diode types. You've got the Zener, which is a brighter, grittier selection, and the germanium, which is darker and less aggressive. We'll hear that in action in a couple of minutes. The diode blend here blends the saturated signal with the dry input, and that blend is then sent on to the compressor. We've got a ratio knob here for 2, 4, 12, or 20:1 ratios. As you change the ratio, the threshold's offset so you can keep a consistent output signal to compare the ratios. And it sounds like as you turn it up, you get a little bit harder knee compression out of it as well. The Fury button in the middle gives you 10 times everything. You've got 10 times more distortion, 10 times greater attack and release times. And when you just really want to nuke something, that Fury knob is really great. Think sort of like an 1176 with all buttons in and signal cranked. That's kind of the effect you can get with that Fury button. This mix knob needs some explaining because it's a little bit different than most compressors. It mixes the output from the dry sat mix over here, the saturated and dry signal, with the compressed saturated dry blend. It does not mix with the dry input. So if you went all the way just to this left side and you went sat, you're getting the output of this mix control. If you went to comp, you're getting the compressor plus this blend control right here. So again, it's not just for the dry output. The VU meter in the middle has a pretty cool display. You get this tri-display which shows gain reduction, input, and output with 3 different needles all on the same display. You could go with just gain reduction or just the input and output. In the compressor section over here, the attack is variable from 100 microseconds all the way up to 50 milliseconds. The release is 15 milliseconds all the way up to 5 seconds or 5,000 milliseconds. You've got a high-pass filter on the side chain all the way up to 300 hertz to control the amount of bass that triggers the gain reduction. You've got this kind of unique sidechain boost into the sidechain signal for the compressor detection circuit. This is a fixed 9 dB bell, but this is variable, sweepable between 2.6 and 10K. And for lack of a better term, you can think of it as a sort of a deharsher. You can deharsh any source. The threshold, of course, we turn clockwise to lower the threshold and get a little bit more gain reduction out of it. So that pretty much covers the controls. Let's hear it in action. We're going to start by listening to it on a kick drum. And here's the kick drum part with no compression at all. You get the idea. I'm going to engage it. I set this up with the Zener limiter. I brought that blend between the dry and saturated signal down a bit. 4:1 ratio, not using the Fury. I brought the compression mix down a bit as well. You can see the attack and release times I set up here. I do have the high-pass filter on the side chain so that the very lowest frequencies of the kick drum don't trigger the compressor too much. I'm not getting a huge amount of gain reduction. You'll see it in here, but it really just beefs up the kick drum. Here it is compressed with SILIKA. I'll bypass it on and off as it plays, starting with it off. It's a subtle thickness, but if you listen really closely, you'll hear it there. If I really drive the input, you'll hear what it's really doing. Bypass. Just some really nice saturation at the low end on that kick drum. Moving on to snare drum, you can see all the different settings I've got set up here. I did engage the Fury button. I'll start with it bypassed. I want to push that compressor a little bit harder, I can lower the threshold. Bypassed. I definitely wouldn't take it that far with this particular snare part in normal circumstances, but just to give you a sense of what it can really do. Now we're going to check it out on a drums bus, and you're going to hear how SILIKA really glues everything together and thickens it up. I'll start with it bypassed and then engage as it plays. Just a really nice subtle thickening and good control and glue with that compressor. I'm going to put that saturation blend and I'm going to put the mix of the compressor all the way up to 100% for both of them and cycle through these 4 ratios so we can hear the different sounds of these on the drums bus, starting with the 2-to-1 ratio. Bring these back to about 50% each and cycle through one more time. And again, bypassed. And engaged. Moving along to a bass part now, we're going to cycle through the Zener and germanium diode type here, and the bass part really shows you the difference between these two. Here it is with the Zener first. And germanium. I'm going to really crank this input. Listen to the difference as I cycle between them. So you can really hear how the Zener is a little bit brighter, more aggressive. The germanium is a little bit mellower and less aggressive sounding. Now, if I dial back the mix knob all the way to the sat side, I'm bypassing the compressor here completely. I can use SILIKA as just a distortion generator for the bass part. And I'll dial it into taste with our blend knob for the saturation. Here's the bass part without it. And with. You could really have the bass part cut through nicely with that little bit of saturation you dial in. Don't even need to use the compressor side. And the last audio example for SILIKA is going to be on the mix bus, and I picked a preset here. I actually went to the mix bus subcategory, dense and glued preset, tried it out, and it did exactly what it said. The mix got a little bit thicker and glued together. I'll start with it bypassed and engage as it plays.
What you want, you gonna get from you. What you want, she's gonna get from you.
And if we didn't like that amount of saturation, we could always dial it back with the blend knob.
What you want, you gonna get from you. What you want, she's gonna get from you.
And in that case, it's just really subtle saturation and compression that glues everything together. So there we have it, our first look at SILIKA from Kush Audio. It's impossible to make the distortion side of this, the diode side, sound harsh. It really doesn't at all. You can crank the input, you can have tons of saturation, and it's still, though aggressive, not unpleasant to listen to like a lot of digital tools can be. So that's fantastic. That coupled with the compressor side, and Kush makes some great compressors, so we know that works, makes this a really versatile and great sounding compressor. So highly recommended. If you have any questions or comments, let me know in the comment section down below. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already, so we can keep you in the loop as to what's coming up next, and I'll see you in the next one.